Welcome to the Will Smith of Chicago, Illinois, nonprofit home video and artwork creations. In this particular video, I want you to check out my Nibiru Temple Mount Alien Facebook page, where I discovered that when we draw 12 horizontal lines across the African continent land surface from south to north, and look at it with satellite imagery, we will see the African tribes living in each of the 12 horizontal land surface lines. This comes the term in which I call the 12 African continent tribes, in which the SPHINX11, in which I am showing in the video, actually ruled over in ancient Judea and Jerusalem. Now, in the 10th line, you're going to see Ethiopia, and in the 11th line, you're going to see Egypt. Okay, Giza, where the Isaiah 1919 Giza pyramids are. But way before we zoom into the Isaiah 1919 Giza pyramids, as we area view the 12 African continent lines from outer space. Well, if we look at the northeast African continent land surface area, what we are looking at is a yellow desert triangular sand area, in which represent a royal Egyptian headdress. In the center of this royal desert triangular land surface area, we see a U-shaped face representing the African Sphinx, in which we now see face in front of the Isaiah 1919 Giza pyramid. Now remember, the 400-year-old mistranslated King James Bible illegally changed the 12 African continent tribes into the 12 sons of Jacob. This occurred 400 years ago in 1611 by the King James of England, when he appointed 72 Greek and Hebrew scholars to fly to the 11th and 12th area-viewed African continent land surface lines. And so, when they studied the Islamic Aramaic Dead Sea Scrolls, in which turns out to be the language of the area-viewed African continent Sphinx of ancient Judea and Jerusalem, they mistranslated the role of the African continent Sphinx as it relates to him ruling over the book of Genesis, 49th chapter and 8th verse, as the line of the tribe of Judah over all of the 12 African continent tribes. Now remember, it says, all thy father's children shall bow down unto thee. So whose father's children are we talking about? So if we go back to the book of Psalms, 105th chapter and 23rd verse, and compare it to Ezra, 1st chapter 3rd verse, the Ezra 1st chapter 3rd verse states, let us go to Jerusalem, which is located in the land of Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Jacob. Now remember, I must remind you that the European Gentile nations, in which started the early United States government as English pilgrims and trading ships in black hats, coats, tights, and shoes. This is the same dress code in which we see the modern European-faced Israelites of the 10 horns of Daniel, as they are seen as European-faced Israelites praying at the Western Wall. Now remember, we're talking about an African continent, a geographic 12th land surface line where Jerusalem is located, in which the European Gentile nation, that's English pilgrims that started the early United States government in black hats, coats, and tights, they took that land over, which led up to the Catholics in Europe wearing the royal Egyptian headdress as nuns, the Catholic women. So as we go back to the 1609 transatlantic slave trade, and which was brought about by theological racism of the European Gentile nations against the normal-headed African continent area-viewed land of Judea and Jerusalem. So this would be the Sphinx of the Bible, in which was denied theological racism by the European Gentile nations. Particularly, we're talking about the dress code of the English pilgrims that started the early United States government as they got off of trading boats that came from Europe and started the early 13 colonies in America. Now remember, the 1492 European named Christopher Columbus, that in ships arrived from Europe and so-called discovered America, Indians was on horseback shooting bow and arrows in Canada. So as this European Gentile nation took over America, and they also took over the 11th and 12th area-viewed African continent geographic Holy Land surface line, where Judea and Jerusalem is located. This brings us back full circle to the book of Esther, first chapter, 3rd verse, which says, "Let us go up to Jerusalem, which is located in the land of Judah, and build a house to the Lord God, Jacob." Now, this video deals with the area view geographic land surface face image of ancient Judaism. As we see in the 11th area view African continent land surface line, we see this desert yellow royal Egyptian headdress as a triangle. Now, that has a U-shaped dark face in the center, which represents the African things of ancient Giza, Gaza, Palestine, Ethiopia, and Jerusalem, in which the European Gentile nation that started the early United States government denied theological racism. As the 72 Greek and Hebrew scholars flew to the 11th and 12th area view African continent geographic land surface line where Judea and Jerusalem is located, they started studying the Qumran cave Islamic Aramaic Dead Sea Scrolls, in which was the language of the Ethiopian children of Judea and Jerusalem. So as we look at this great archaeological and theological discovery, in which Laurel Smith of Chicago, Illinois, nonprofit home video and artworks creations has made, we must come to the conclusion that the area viewed African continent SPHINX11 face has a second SPHINX1 face. So this is the like if you stand in front of the African Sphinx in front of the Isaiah 1919 North African Egyptian pyramids, and you take a picture of his face with your cell phone, right? You're looking at a U-shaped face within the real Egyptian headdress. But if you draw a line from the left and right side of the headdress up till they meet, you're going to see a triangle. So then when we go back to the area viewed African continent as seen with space or with satellite imagery, we're looking at the northeast African continent land surface line where Judea and Jerusalem is located. Now Jerusalem, as the first chapter 3rd verse, is in the 12th horizontal land surface line. Now you're falling off of the North African continent into the water. Okay, so it looks like a V-shaped piece of land where Jerusalem is at the top of the V-shaped piece of land. Now Judea is in the 11th horizontal line of the area view Northeast African continent, yellow desert triangular sand area, where we see a dark U-shaped face. So as we rediscovered that the reason why ancient Judaism was so important to the 12th African continent tribes before the 1611 King James of England that wrote the 400-year-old mistranslated King James Bible that's based on the false man-based European Lord God image of Jesus religion. That means that the Sphinx was transported above the atmospheric regions of planet Earth and into the black outer regions of space by Ezekiel's Old Testament glowing, circular, wheeling and wheel-like U.F.O. aliens. Now these aliens has been discovered as to be 4 feet tall. They have big black O-shaped eyes. They had 3 fingers and 1 thumb on each hand. They had no sex organs between their legs. In fact, they had smooth skin there where a woman's vagina would be. So this would place them out of the category of the 400-year-old mistranslated King James Bible false man-based Lord God world religion. Now, as we raise up the white robe of Jesus and the bearded old man image of Jehovah white robe, you see that they both have a painting. So the European Gentile nation's biggest sin was denying the aliens that cannot be placed in the category of a man, even though they have big black oval-shaped eyes, 3 fingers and 1 thumb on each hand, and they stand about 4 feet tall. They have 3 fingers and 1 thumb on each hand. And so as we make this great archaeological, theological, and astronomical discovery concerning the area viewed African continent, SPHINX11 land surface area, there's a second, I'm showing all those images of my video, there's a second Egyptian Sphinx face as we reviewed the 11th area viewed African continent, northeast African continent geographic land surface area, where Ezra 1:3 places Judea within. So at the base of this real Egyptian triangular desert area representing the Egyptian headdress, we see a second octagon. And this octagon is so important because within it, that's like if you draw a line from east to west across the middle of an octagon, right? Then that's the base of the second SPHINX1 real Egyptian headdress. So his face actually appears from the midsection of the octagon 1 up. But now his chin is where the dome or rock is in the SPHINX1 octagon. Now, as I enlarged it and placed it on this video for you to see, you will soon discover that underneath the dome or chin of the Sphinx 1 in the Sphinx 11 area viewed 11 African continent land surface line area of Judea, you're going to see 5 blocks stacked on top of one another that they form steps that you walk upon. Now this is half of a Babylonian step pyramid in which the book of Psalms, 105th chapter 23rd verse was speaking of falsely. Remember, they was talking about 12 sons of Jacob entering into Africa from somewhere else, in Babylon. But if we reconnect the before the flood of Noah, the African continent land surface image, we connect the lost East Arabian land surface back to the northeast African continent. Then the Red Sea disappears, and it becomes a very thin river. But now we have the Jabal al-Arez, 5 holy pyramid-shaped mountain peaks, and they also look like 5 blocks stacked up on top of one another. Okay, in other words, if you're looking at 5 pyramids, straightforward. Now today you're looking at 3 pyramids standing in front of you. So picture looking at 5 pyramids. Now you see 5 triangles, right? What about if you write it on a piece of paper vertically, those 5 triangles? Now they look like 5 steps that you walk up upon. Now turn it back horizontal, now they look like 5 pyramid triangles. Now if we go back to the area view African continent, geographic land surface line, 11, where Judea is located in Ezra 1:3, what we're going to see is this within the Sphinx 1 octagon at the base of the Sphinx 11 up on the area view northeast African continent. Sphinx 11 face image of ancient Judaism. What we're going to see is below the Sphinx 1 chin, where the dome is, we see 5 blocks. Now these are ancient blocks upon the African continent land surface that represents the origin of the step pyramid civilization of the Babylonian step pyramid civilization of Ham. Now since there's no one entering into ancient Egypt from northeast Africa as starting ancient Judaism, as the 400-year-old mistranslated King James Bible from false European Gentile nation tells the Afro-Americans in their neighborhood churches. Therefore, if we reconnect Arabia, where Babylon and Iraq is, and the step pyramids are, to its East African continent coastline, then there's no one else in East Africa, Northeast Africa, except the original 12 African continent tribes, in which the things that was denied theological racism by the European Gentile nation in Genesis 49 chapter 8 verse. He was taken above the atmospheric regions of planet Earth. About 4 feet tall, big black oval-shaped ass, 3 fingers and 1 thumb on each hand, Old Testament, wielding and wield like U.F.Os, in which Ezekiel saw. And so this is why ancient Judaism was so important to the 12 African continent tribes. But as